Hi, everyone. Welcome officially and good evening. Thank you so much for joining us virtually today. My name is Hayla Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am so pleased to welcome you to today's live author reading of new work from the press. Today, we're going to be hearing from Tracey Kyler, author of Seizing Fate, a Gargoyle Order novel released on September 30th, Stephen Baker, author of Dark Sight, a novel released on November 4th, and Fish Nealman, author of Born Posthumous, a novel released on releasing actually next week on November 18th. All three authors' books can be purchased from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, you can find the books on Atmosphere Press's website as well. That's at atmospherepress.com/books. And I just put links to each book in the chat for you so you can easily check this out. At the end of today's event, we are going to have time for your questions. So during the readings, if you've got a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type those in the chat and I will make sure they get asked. We do ask that you stay muted for the duration of the event, but feel free to use the chat for praise and comments in addition to your questions. And one last note is that we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. If you have a manuscript of your own, we would love to read it, so submit your work today to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in to support Tracey, Stephen, and Fish today. We're going to start off with our first reader, who is Tracey Kyler. Tracey lives in Ohio with her family and Minnie Golden Doodle, and in her spare time, she enjoys baking, crocheting, visiting local restaurants, taking family walks, and binge watching the Great British Bake Off and documentaries. They're all activities that I can also absolutely get behind. She's an avid Formula One fan and loves cheering on her favorite hockey and football teams, and of course, all things Star Wars since the first movie came out when she was a child. Today, we're going to be hearing Tracey read from Seizing Fate, a Gargoyle Order novel, in which Cora, a woman who has lost everything, is saved from a brutal attack by the mysterious Eric. As their worlds collide and passion ignites, Cora is drawn into an ancient war where she must choose between protecting the man she loves and fighting for their future against Eric's ruthless brother. Let's now welcome Tracey to hear more of the story unfold.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in. So I'm going to start with, just to kind of explain what I'm doing, I'm going to start with chapter 1, which is really short, and then I'm going to pick it up in kind of the middle of chapter 2, after the attack on Cora, and Eric saves her. So just to kind of give a little bit of a broad perspective of the story. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 1, this happens in March. So from the rooftops, Eric Stanton followed the slight, dark-haired figure quickly making her way as dusk turned to night. Cora was nervous like she always was walking home from work. She tried to hide it, tried to go unnoticed by everyone around her, but he knew. He watched closely and noted nothing out of the ordinary, though that didn't mean she was completely safe. Things could change in a heartbeat. A fallen one could decide she was their prey for the night. Another human could assault her, and if either of those things happened, it would be the last thing they ever did. He eyed the punk who just turned the corner and followed behind her. Case in point, keeping his focus on the young man, he moved ahead to the alley, just a couple blocks from Cora's apartment, and waited. Eric had been around for a long time, a very long time, and he'd seen a lot of things. As a member of the Order, it was his duty, his purpose to watch over the innocent, watch over them and protect them from the evil around them. Evil, like his father and brother. He hated them with a passion, utterly and completely loathed them. He smirked. The sentiment was definitely mutual. His father and brother would kill him if they ever had the opportunity, but that's what tended to happen when you sided with an enemy, when you went against every reason your father created you. Thank the universe and everything in it that his mother's DNA overrode his father's. It was all complicated and messy, and why he couldn't have the one thing he wanted, he craved the most, a life with Cora. He blew out a frustrated and somewhat weary breath. She was his one, and she didn't even know he existed. Fate was not always kind-hearted. He caught Cora's sweet floral scent as she passed by the dark alley. He relished the small gift, but it didn't distract him. He had the human to deal with. When Eric chose his quarry, there was no salvation from what was to come. He was silent, lethal, stronger, faster, smarter. No one could hide from him. He stalked the night and he owned it. He and his brethren, who were his real family. No one was quite like him, though. No one could do what he did. His enemies turned tail and ran at the mere mention of his name, at the slightest chance that he was coming their direction, afraid he was coming for them. If he chose them to play his deadly game, there was no escape, and if they targeted the one he loved, if they targeted his Cora, he would most definitely kill them. Nothing on this earth could stop him if they hurt her, and there would be no mercy. The idiot following her would learn soon enough. A few seconds later, and faster than anyone could track, Eric yanked him into the dark alleyway. Let go of me if you know what's good for you, the man boasted after he recovered from his initial surprise. Eric laughed. It was a hard laugh, a laugh that should make anyone who heard it wary. I don't think so. I'm at the top of the food chain, and you, well, you're just running around gathering table scraps. Dramatic, he knew, but you had to speak their language. The man wrinkled his face in disgust and disbelief as he said, Man, please, do you know who? His words trailed off as Eric stepped out of the shadows. The man had some size to him in his own right, but he paled in comparison to Eric. Taller, leaner, and stronger, with an aura that screamed ticked off, the man took an involuntary step backward when he fully took Eric in. Look, I don't want any trouble. No? Is that why you were following the woman? Because you don't want any trouble? The man turned white as a ghost. I don't know what you're talking about. Eric stared right through him, making him take another step backward. Yes, you do. And if I ever see you anywhere near her again, you'll be dead before you even know what hit you. The man gulped loudly. Are we clear? He nodded, then took off running back in the direction he'd come. Eric grinned wickedly. He couldn't help it. He loved teaching those stupid morons that they weren't the baddest things prowling the city streets. Okay, so chapter 2, I'm jumping into, and that happens in May, so it's a few weeks later. And this is right after Eric saved her in the attack and has just walked her home. So Cora starts it off. Thank you, Eric, for everything. Just thank you. He gently took her hand and gave it a little squeeze. You're very welcome, Cora. I'm never going to see him again. That thought came out of nowhere and hit her so hard that for a minute she couldn't breathe. Why does that matter so much? Eric let go of her hand, and without another word, he headed toward the direction of the alley, headed away from her and out of her life. Just when she thought he wouldn't turn back, he did. He offered one of his easy, dimpled smiles. She smiled, waved, then punched in the code for her building. She didn't bother with the elevator, but hit the stairs, climbing as fast as she could. In her apartment, she sat down on her small but comfortable couch as her mind worked furiously. Tonight had been filled with so many things, awful things, terrifying things, and Eric. Had she just made the huge mistake by not finding out more about him? No, no, this was it. He could have clearly said something, asked her something if he wanted to see her again, right? Right? 30 minutes later, she still sat in the same spot on the couch. Her mind churned over the attack. Her wrists throbbed. Thoughts of Eric worked their way into. Something small lightly bounced off the glass pane of her window. She was about to ignore it when it happened again. What the heck? She crossed to the window, then sucked in a sharp breath. Eric stood below, grinning up at her with a box from Marco's in his hand. He pointed to her, gestured to the pizza, then the front door of the building. He disappeared. Cora raced down to the front door of the building, praying the whole way that someone didn't snag his gift if he wasn't waiting for her there. Nope, there it sat. Excuse me, sorry. There it sat with a small note tucked into the box. She snatched up the box, then peeked at the sidewalk to catch a glimpse of him, but he was nowhere in sight. Back in her apartment, she flipped open the box and beamed. Pepperoni and extra cheese. Marco certainly had a hand in that. Butterflies fluttered in her stomach as she opened the note. Cora, I took a guess that you'd like a replacement. If I was wrong, please feel free to give it to a neighbor. I hope you get some rest this weekend. Take it easy with that wrist. I'm sorry I couldn't do anything more. It's for the best. Take care of yourself and please stay safe. Eric. Eric placed the pizza box on the stoop by the door and splayed his hand flat on the wood of the door. He could feel her in there, and all he wanted to do was go back to her. I'm never going to see him again. Why does that matter so much? Her thoughts tore through him when they ran through her head. So did the emotion behind them when it stole her breath. He could barely stand it. He stood perfectly still, listening, sensing, feeling, reading all he could, waiting for the elevator door to ding, which was his cue to leave. Instead, he heard her coming down the stairwell. He cocked an inquisitive brow. Interesting. The doorknob turned. Time to go. It's for the best. And it was, but that didn't mean he had to like it. He muttered a quiet curse as he flashed down the street and around the corner. He stopped and smiled. He felt her surprise and joy for his little gift, felt her happiness from his note, but also the confusion. It's for the best. She didn't understand, and how could she? She had no idea who or what he was, had no idea the amount of danger he just put her in simply by coming back. He didn't sense any fallen ones around, but just in case he made it look like a simple act of kindness that was typical of the order. It was why he didn't stay to talk to her again when she came to collect his gift. Her scent had invaded his sharp senses the moment he put on his jacket, but the slight breeze that just kicked up made it even stronger as it swirled around him. Her light floral scent was sweet, just like she was. It wreaked havoc on his thoughts, not to mention the rest of him. She was so beautiful, with her long, thick raven hair falling to the middle of her back. It was all he could do to not run his fingers through it to see if the strands were as silky as they looked. Her blue eyes so light, their color was like ice. Her long, dark eyelashes that framed them, the dainty features of her face, her porcelain skin. You can't have her. He cursed again. He closed his eyes and breathed her in, concentrated on her. She was having a rough time up there. He closed his eyes. She climbed into bed after eating, but couldn't turn her mind off. Her thoughts whirled. They were all jumbled together, and along with the pain from her wrist, she couldn't find any rest. Just walk away. He couldn't do it. He couldn't. She was still so unsettled, and he felt the fear that remained, the fear that ran underneath everything else. And well, he almost lost her. Something cold slithered up his spine with that thought. He refused to think on it anymore. She was safe in her apartment, hurt but safe. He wondered what she would do if she had any idea that because of the abilities he inherited from his mother, he knew her silent thoughts, knew every emotion she felt, that he already knew where she lived because he'd been protecting her for weeks. He had to lock down his brain so something didn't slip out because you couldn't really just start off your first conversation with a person like you'd known them for years. Normally that wasn't hard, but being so close to his one made him want to word vomit just about everything that was in his head. He sighed quietly, just more reminders of how different he was from everyone else. He opened his eyes to the empty street. He should keep going. He really, really should. But he didn't. Of course he didn't. He fell into the shadows, and making sure no one was around to see him, he leapt 4 stories to the rooftop. Jogging across to the other side, he easily leapt to the next roof and continued rooftop to rooftop until he made it back to the building next door to Cora's. Her bedroom lights were still on, dimmed, but on. Finally fallen asleep, though. Sheer exhaustion had taken over, but her sleep was fitful. She left the lights on out of fear, and that knowledge rankled him to his core. No woman should be so afraid that she couldn't turn her lights off to go to sleep in her own home, especially her. He jumped over to her building, then sat with his back against the wall that jutted up a couple feet past the rooftop. He was right above Cora's bedroom, and he closed his eyes and concentrated on her. I'm right here. Relax your mind so you can rest. 2 minutes later, she was in a deep, dreamless sleep. He kept his eyes closed and just soaked in her presence, knowing she was free for now. Her gentle nature and the memory of her soft, melodic voice warmed him. Her scent that reminded him of honeysuckle was branded into his senses. He would never forget it, any of it. The very short time, the very short time they spent together was a gift to be treasured, and it was his own personal hell. Acute longing cut through him. Life was so unfair, but he already knew that. His father and brother taught him that lesson at 15. That was a long time ago, but that didn't mean it was forgotten or forgiven. His hands tightened into fists as he drew in a settling breath. There was so much around Cora that she didn't understand. Things like why she was attacked tonight, things like who her attackers really were, things that were, unfortunately, his every day, things that made him unique. Shoving his hands in his pockets, his brow knitted, he pulled his hand back out and looked down to find Cora's black hair tie. He grinned like a complete idiot, then pulled it onto his left wrist. He closed his eyes again and focused on her, even more in tune with her now. Just being able to feel her soothed him. It quieted the silent storm rumbling inside him. It eased the bitterness there. Instead of focusing on his past, he concentrated on their short time together and pretended for a long, long while that they could have more and what that could be like, how incredible it would be. He let out a long, slow breath. What are you doing, Eric? You know better. He did, but right now, he really didn't care. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. A lot of tension there. So that's exciting, certainly to know what or to think about what might be coming next. So thank you for that reading. Reading next tonight is Stephen Baker. Stephen's first novel, The Boost, from Tor Books in 2014, follows the brain chip revolution that begins in Dark Sight, which is the book we'll be hearing from today. Cricket's Reviews called the book a true delight of a techno thriller that has deep, dark roots in the present. Stephen has worked as a journalist in Paris, Mexico City, Caracas, and New York. His nonfiction work includes The Numerati from Houghton Mifflin in 2008, which was translated into 20 languages. A graduate of Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, he lives in Montclair, New Jersey. As I mentioned, he'll be reading today from Dark Sight, which is set in spring 2043, in which 15-year-old Alyssa, equipped with a Chinese smart chip, navigates a dangerous world of AI and brain surveillance. When her boyfriend is imprisoned in a quote-unquote dark site, Alyssa must use her networked chip to uncover answers, leading her on a risky mission into Washington's highest echelon power. Stephen, take it away.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to start with a little historical introduction here. I was working on a book with IBM Research about the computer they were building to play Jeopardy, and this was in 2010, and that project, that book, got me thinking a lot about how the future in which more and more our brains and our computers are going to be working together, and how that's going to change the way we think and change what we need to know and what skills we need to have. So I jumped ahead to 2072 when I figured that people for 30 years would have had cognitive chips in their brain to help them basically to boost their thinking. And I called that book The Boost. And this one is a prequel to The Boost because it takes place 30 years earlier. And it's the very, very beginning when the first girl in Washington, D.C. gets a brain chip put into her head. And it's a time when it's only 18 years from now, but it's a time when the companies that build the technology have basically taken over much of our government. And the democracy we know isn't really alive anymore. So I'm going to start with the beginning of the book. It takes place on Wednesday, and it's in her voice. It's in Alyssa's voice. She's a 16-year-old girl. It's Wednesday, March 11th, 2043. I saw the video yesterday in French class. My friend Becky was giggling at something on her screen. Then her face went dead white. She rolled up her screen quickly, hurrying to hide what she'd seen. She reached over and dropped it in my lap. Madame Blanchard saw the movement. She turned her head and was still for a moment, and then she went back to the same story about the ant and the grasshopper, which we've been going over forever. It's Javier, Becky whispered to me. I flattened her screen on my lap, and a video popped into action. I saw the Capitol dome. Flying above it was a black drone surrounded by a few birds. Then the drone tilted and dove. It got closer and bigger on the screen. Then it slowed down and shifted to the side and hovered right behind a man with perfect posture and a long black ponytail. It was Javier, just like Becky said. He graduated 2 years ago, but practically everyone knows him because he was the greatest soccer player we've ever had. I don't know who took the video, probably a tourist. It showed him walking toward the big brick Smithsonian building, the one that looks like a castle. He didn't seem to notice that the drone was practically sitting on him. Everyone else in the mall had stopped and was staring at Javier and the drone. Javier kept walking. Madame Blanchard saw that I was distracted, and she asked me something about the date. I looked up to answer, and just at that moment I saw movement on the screen. I gave her the date in French, Mardi le 10 Mars. Non, non, she said. She wanted to know when La Fontaine wrote the idiotic story we've been studying. I ignored her and looked down at the screen. The drone had snatched up Javier and was hoisting him into the sky. He kicked his legs like a bug. The drone pulled him in and flew away, getting smaller and smaller, shrinking into a dot. I rolled up the screen while Madame Blanchard yelled at me in French. I slipped it back to Becky, and she mouthed the words, "dark sight." I didn't believe it at first. So that's the beginning of the story. Now, Alyssa introduces herself, and I won't bore you with all those details, but she has a chip in her head, and so I'm going to talk about when her grandfather, who's a software billionaire, told her that she had to get this chip put in her head. For the last 2.5 months, I've been keeping a huge secret. There's a Chinese chip in my head, what they call a jinbu, or boost. My grandfather has one too, though he barely knows how to use it. I think a lot of people in Asia already have these chips. I'm sworn to secrecy about it. I'm not even allowed to tell my father. It makes me feel horribly alone. This all started after the New Year. My grandfather sent a stretch pod to fetch me from school to his mansion in Georgetown. He was waiting for me in his jungle room, which has trees and vines that look 1,000 years old, and tables made of huge petrified leaves. While most pictures of my grandfather show him in normal pants and shirts, he wears ancient yoga clothes when he's alone and ties up what's left of his gray hair in a small ponytail. He was lying sideways in his hammock when I walked in. I went up and kissed him on the cheek. Then I sat down. He lifted himself up on one elbow and detailed what was in the works for me. "I have a jet ready to fly you there." "Where?" "Jakarta, Lissy, Indonesia. I've been telling you about this. The brain chip, the boost." "Oh, I thought it was a hypothetical." "The whole procedure takes only 3 days, including training." I imagined myself in an Asian hospital all alone. They wheel me into an operating room where they cut open my head. Then they stitch in a chip that could turn into a smoking ruin within seconds. A short circuit could kill me. "I'm not going." "Lissy, we've discussed this. The Chinese and just about everyone else on their side of the world are in line for these chips. They're getting smarter, advancing. I'm not about to let my only grandchild be left behind." "Like every other American who doesn't happen to be Winslow Cooper's granddaughter?" He just smiled. "Don't worry about school. I've got that covered." He described a weekend retreat for young geniuses at a resort in the Philippines. He would tell my father that it was an opportunity we just couldn't pass up. He studied my face and could tell I wasn't convinced. "Don't worry," he said. "He'll get through the weekend. He's a big boy." "But is the retreat real?" "Yes, it is, but you're not going there. You're going to Jakarta, precious, where you're going to become a different kind of genius." He winked. I think my grandfather was the first American to get a brain implant. Even before most of us knew what the Chinese were up to, he secretly flew to Beijing and paid whatever it took for an early model, a prototype. That was about a year ago. When he told me about it much later, he admitted that his boost was fairly useless because his old brain was ossified. Plus, he had no one to message with. But he predicted that my young brain would one day link up with an implant and make magic. Sitting in my grandfather's jungle room, I could pretty much guess what my father's reaction would be when I came home from Jakarta with a boost. It worried me. "I don't think my father will—" "Shh!" My grandfather climbed out of his hammock with a groan. He's 74, and despite the loose clothes he wears and the ponytail, he's no yogi. He walked toward me slowly and looked me in the eye. Then he delivered a dead serious warning. I was not to tell my father about the brain chip under any circumstances. He made a karate chop gesture with his hand, as if to silence even whispers. He is not to know. It's strange to say this, but for at least a few minutes on that January afternoon, the idea of keeping a secret this huge from my father didn't seem like such a big deal. There were lots of things I didn't tell him. I kept quiet about boys and about tests I flubbed and all the stuff kids do at parties and in pods. Hiding things was normal. So as my grandfather told me in his most menacing voice that I was not to say about a word about the Chinese brain implant, I just nodded. I could not imagine the lies it might lead me into or the constant fear that people would find out my secret. I was blind to that, but I did have a sense I was veering into trouble. I was also betraying my father. My grandfather, though, knows how to appeal to my ambition. The way he sees it, the world is divided between a small number of winners and huge masses of losers. The winners are like him. They don't just accept risk, they hunt for it. They grab for what he calls the prize. Losers are like my father. It hurts me to write that because I don't really believe it's true. My father's a Spanish teacher at Columbia Heights High School. He's a good person. But from my grandfather's perspective, he takes no chances and settles for what life gives him. The divide between my father and grandfather couldn't be bigger. While my grandfather made his fortune in technology, my father distrusts it. If he had his way, technology would have stayed frozen in time right after he got his first iPhone, which he keeps as a dead souvenir in his top bureau drawer. He shows no interest in screens or lenses, and I don't think he spent 1 minute in VR. He plays jazz on the clarinet, old jazz. Becky, who's the only friend I would ever talk to about these things, has a theory. She says that my mother, who wrote opera librettos, married my father to rebel against my grandfather and his values, which I suppose include money, power, and ambition. Even after nodding to my grandfather and agreeing to keep the implant a secret, I was scared about the surgery. My grandfather switched into his salesman mode, one of his specialties. He described my trip as a mission. The goal was to turn me into a sort of superhero. Think about what you're going to be able to do. Then he started listing the powers I'd have, counting them on his fingers. I'd be able to send messages with my thoughts. I'd be able to meet with my friends in virtual worlds. You can be in Rome the day they assassinate Caesar. I can do that stuff on VR games now without brain surgery. He looked disappointed. But with this, you'll live it. It'll be inside you. Will I be able to turn it off? He laughed. What a question. He explained that the brain chips would make our whole series smarter. It's a cognitive revolution, Lissy, probably the biggest one we've had since our jump from ape to Homo sapien. I'd heard that line from him more than once, and I rolled my eyes. It'll be part of your brain, not some screen you can turn on and off. When I asked him how exactly it would make me smarter, he told me that I'd be able to model and predict virtually any scenario. That meant nothing to me. Then he talked about riding shotgun. That would let me experience life through someone else's eyes. You'll basically be in their head. But what's the hurry? It was true, I had to admit, that shotguns sounded extremely cool. But if none of my friends had brain implants, I wouldn't have anyone to do it with, except maybe him. In any case, we Americans would soon have our own chip, the so-called victory. Do you sit and wait for progress, my grandfather asked? Or do you hunt it down? I could tell he wanted me out the door and on my way, but I needed more convincing. I had a question and was having trouble wording it in a way that didn't sound silly. Would this chip, I finally said, do any good? My grandfather looked puzzled. He took a deep breath and tugged on his ponytail. Good for what? Would it help anybody? Who needs help? He was getting impatient. I thought about the Africans who line up for food Wednesday mornings by the church on Columbia Road. I couldn't see how a brain chip in my head would ever help them, and if I mentioned them, my grandfather would call me a bleeding heart. Then I thought about my father, who's been so sad for so long. If he found out about my brain chip, it would make him even sadder. I kept my mouth shut. My grandfather gazed at my face as if I were the strangest creature in the world. Think of intelligence as light, he whispered. One day you'll use it to battle the forces of darkness. Then he worked his mouth into a smile. He might have been joking, making fun of what he calls my pie in the sky way of thinking. But before I could ask him exactly what he meant by light and darkness, he heaved himself to his feet, planted a dry kiss on my forehead, and pointed toward the door. His jet was waiting for me. So off she goes to Indonesia and gets a brain chip. And that's the beginning of the story.
Casual first thing to do, right? Well, thank you so much for that reading, Stephen, and
Sure.
introducing us to that world. It's already, of course, established, but very exciting to hear about. So,
Next steps.
yes, of course. Reading third today for our final reading this evening is Fish Nealman. Fish is an award-winning author renowned for his evocative storytelling and meticulously crafted narrative. Living amidst the tranquil, low-lying mountains of rural New Jersey, Fish channels inspiration from his extensive global travels, seamlessly integrating diverse cultural elements into his work. His novels transport readers to vivid locales, both familiar and exotic, offering an authentic lens into the human experience. Celebrated for creating unforgettable characters and extraordinary plots, his stories resonate on a profound emotional level. Each book invites readers on a journey where richly detailed settings, heartfelt exploration, and timeless themes converge to create genuinely memorable literary adventures. Today, we're going to be hearing Fish read from Born Posthumous, where he blends music, memory, and technology in a world where the past refuses to stay silent. Manny Ole, the legendary musician, leaves behind a lasting legacy that continues through a cutting-edge AI, posthumous Manny who composes new hits. This novel weaves together the stories of Emmanuel, a young musician, Linz, an ambitious manager, and the enigmatic holographic Manny, exploring themes of fame, authenticity, and legacy as timelines shift and reality bends. We'll hear more now from Fish. Oh, it looks like you are, there we go.
Yeah, right. If I may, before I start, I do see that one of the people listening in is Brian, and if things haven't changed, he was kind enough to call in from his hospital bed, where I hope he's recovering, and I just want to wish him well and appreciate the fact he made time in his otherwise hectic day. So thank you, and it's wonderful to be here. Born Posthumous is my fifth novel, and it's the story of a musician that is beloved worldwide, that is brought back to life through AI, that is posthumous. The musician himself, Manny Old, is vehemently against AI and would not want to be brought back to have a reincarnation as an AI, and it's largely a misunderstanding with his son as to why that happens. So one of the things within the story is, you know, that the protagonist is going to die. So I am going to read from not chapter 1 or chapter 2, but chapter 20. So towards the very end of the book and midway through chapter 20. The protagonist was driving in a car with his manager, Linz, and through an AI bug in his Linz's autonomous driving car, they go off a ravine, a really bad accident. Linz dies. Manny is in terrible state. He's flown to a hospital. And we pick it up just before he's going to pass away. So, Doctor, thank you for taking my call. I'm Scotty Zane, CEO of StatSig. So very quickly, StatSig is mathematically P is less than 0.01, which is statistically significant. So StatSig is a company name that stands for statistically significant, but you don't need to know that. But I just had the urge to jump in and say that. Anyway, so I'm Scotty Zane, CEO of StatSig, and I'm in one of our conference rooms with my chief AI officer, Odorius Smell. I won't explain how he gets his name. My principal investor is Lynn Sassoon, and Manny Old is our premier client. We understand they've been brought to your hospital. I'm afraid I can't share any information outside of family members, the administrator said. Manny's son, Junior, works for our company. I can bring him into the conference room. Oda, would you mind bringing Junior in? There's not much I can tell you anyway, the administrator said. Thank you, Oda. We have his son right here. He has cerebral palsy, so his communication is limited as he doesn't have his AI-assisted augmentative communication device at hand. So it's starting to sound a little bit like Stephen's book, Scotty said. All I can tell you is Manny was brought into the ER. His situation is highly critical, and I don't have an update from the doctors. They will be doing everything possible. Our hospital has the finest AI-based trauma team, the administrator said. We obviously hope and pray for his recovery, but if he's not going to make it, if there's any way we can have Junior say goodbye, That would be a blessing, Scotty said. Give me the best number to reach you directly. I'll see what I can do, the hospital administrator said. In the hospital's state-of-the-art operating room, an AI-powered surgical team operated with precision and speed to save Manny's life. The environment was a miracle of fresh thinking, and every element turned over to full automation and optimized for peak efficiency without any human assistance. There was no concern over human frailty, nor that of a tremor in a hand. No worry about looking for a sign of fatigue, and no need for an attending nurse to mop a sweaty brow. Each bot was maintained under rigorous standards of self-monitoring. Before an operation could commence, these technical marvels of modern science had to self-attest to a minimum of 1,000 continuous operational hours before the next scheduled service. Whether the maintenance was preventative, aimed at staving off potential issues, predictive, focusing on identifying and addressing problems before they arise, or corrective, fixing faults that occurred, the room epitomized reliability and precision. Each robot was equipped with fully redundant capabilities as an additional safety measure. In computing terms, the entire surgical team was highly available. The only sound piercing the eerie silence was the machine used by the anesthetologist, I can never say that word, excuse me, to keep his patient breathing. The robotic surgeons moved with a fluid grace belying their mechanical nature. Their sleek bodies, made from an antimicrobial material, gleamed under the bright surgical lights. Each was equipped with advanced sensors and the tools to easily take on the most complex procedure. They communicated through a sophisticated digital network, exchanging data and low latency instructions without the need for spoken words. The robot, acting as the lead surgeon, began its assessment of Manny's injuries. The full extent of the damage became apparent. The automobile accident had left him with numerous fractures, internal bleeding, and severe organ damage. His right lung had been punctured by a shattered rib, and his liver and spleen were severely lacerated. The surgeon's advanced imaging systems revealed the grim prognosis. Manny was bleeding out, his life hanging by a thread. The AI surgical team sprang into action, working with a level of coordination and efficiency unmatched by its human counterparts. The robotic nurses prepped Manny for surgery, their deft mechanical hands making precise incisions and inserting IV lines and monitoring devices. The anesthetologist bot carefully regulated Manny's breathing and vital signs, hoping the frail cacophony of flesh and bones lying on the table would remain stable throughout the procedure. As the surgeons began their work, they deployed a swarm of nanobots into Manny's body. These tiny robots, no larger than a grain of sand, navigated his bloodstream and organs, providing real-time data on the extent of the damage. They could even perform minor surgeries and biopsies, allowing the surgeons to target their efforts with unparalleled accuracy. The lead surgeon used its onboard advanced imaging capabilities to guide its actions. The X-ray vision and low-level CAT scans that delivered ultra-high resolution imaging exceeding 8K quality, while minimizing radiation exposure, revealing the intricate details of Manny's injuries. With a series of precise movements, it began to repair the damage, its robotic arms moving with blinding speeds as it sutured torn blood vessels and removed damaged tissue. As the surgery progressed, it became increasingly clear that the injuries were too severe. Despite the AI surgical team's best efforts, they could not stop the internal bleeding, and his vital signs began to deteriorate further. Countless probabilistic simulations were run, searching for any possible way to save him. Still, each time the data was self-evident. Manny was going to die. Responding to a series of event-based digital messages from the hospital administrator, the surgical team initiated the delicate process of reviving their patient. Every coordinated step was executed with meticulous precision. These miracle machines of modern science monitored every vital sign with relentless accuracy, registering hundreds of readings per second as they painstakingly worked to restore consciousness. To manage the excruciating pain, an unusually high dose of potent synthetic opioid cocktail, a precise blend of fentanyl and carfentanil, was administered. This formulation was artificially engineered to deliver analgesic effects 1,500 times stronger than morphine, which bridged the delicate balance between alleviating suffering and preserving what remained of his life. As the medicine unfurled into his veins, through the intravenous drip. Each measured drop moved like a slow, deliberate current, establishing time's rhythm with each pulse. The hospital's administrator contacted Scotty Zane at Statsig and informed him of the situation. He had instructed the robots to revive Manny, but he was unlikely to be fully coherent. He would be capable of saying goodbye to Junior before passing on. I'll send you a secure HIPAA-compliant Zoom link for encrypted transmission, the hospital administrator said. As Manny's eyes fluttered open, he was greeted by the sight of the robotic surgeons, their expressionless faces hovering over him. For the moment, he was confused, his mind struggling to make sense of his surroundings. But then, as the memories of the accident came flooding back, he grasped a sense of the inevitable, and a cold realization descended over him. Heavy and suffocating, he knew he was dying. The lead, excuse me, the lead surgeon spoke to him, in its voice resembling Cary Grant's, calm and reassuring. It explained the extent of his injuries and the futility of further treatment, but they could offer him a chance, a final opportunity to say goodbye to his beloved son. Manny nodded weakly, tears welling as he thought of his boy. The surgeons worked quickly, preparing him for the emotional final reunion. They further adjusted his pain medication and ensured that he was comfortable as humanly possible. And then, with a final nod from the lead surgeon, the room's large screen monitor hanging from the wall was turned on. Junior's face was streaked with tears. For a moment, the two simply looked at each other, their love and grief mingling in the silence of the operating room. The AI surgeons watched, their circuits processing the raw human emotions on display. They recognized that this moment was beyond their scope of their programming. The bond between father and son was something they could not, at this moment, fully understand. They were not yet equipped with artificial empathy. Manny began, his voice weak and his words slow and tempered. My son, as I lay here, but with a few moments, I can feel my life slipping. Before I go, I need to share my heart with you. You see, life has a funny way of teaching us lessons, even when we don't want to learn them. I understand you'll go on living a little bit emptier. That's just how life is. Life gives us that one person who shows us true love exists, and yet fairy tales don't always come true. I know there are plenty of ways to die, but I now know only love can kill you and keep you alive to feel it. It's a strange contradiction, but it's the truth. You've always been the most precious thing in my life, more valuable than any time I have left. Every moment I've spent with you has been a treasure, and if I could do it all again, I wouldn't trade any of our moments. I've always believed in love. I believe in the power of vulnerability because it lets us connect, and connection is the essence of our existence. As I prepare to leave, I find myself caught in this indescribable space between loving you and hating that I must say goodbye. I don't think I'll ever stop missing you, but I'm not sure that's a good thing. But I want you to know my love for you will never die. It will live on even after I'm gone. You have brought joy and light into my life and your mother's, and I am forever grateful for every moment. So as I take my final breath, I want you to remember this. Love yourself just as I have loved you, and when you can, share that love with others. You'll have a heart of gold. Learn to recognize the natural order of things and the inevitability of triumph and loss in life. That's the secret of a life well lived. Manny closed his eyes, and the robot terminated the call. Done.
Thank you so much for that reading, Fish. Definitely a serious tone there. And it really, I think that's part of the book. It really makes you think about so many different things. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Thank you.
Of course. At this time, we do have some time for our audience Q&A. So if you've got a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type those in the chat and I will make sure they get asked. We do have a question that is for all three authors. This one is, all three of these books are speculative in nature. What was the inspiration for your book? I'm thinking we can go in reading order. So Tracey, do you want to start us off on this one?
Sure. So for me, I have always grown up, I've always loved like this type of genre. I think I read, Dracula when I was 13 and Frankenstein and all those good things, right, to get started. Um, I really wanted to do a different tone though. I didn't want to take the same characters that you see, pretty frequently in this type of um, book that I wrote. And so that's why I went with the gargoyles. It's just different. You don't see that a whole lot. And doing a lot of research on like the gargoyle myth, it was pretty much they were all like protection and things like that. So I just kind of took that and run with it. And then, the fallen ones, it doesn't say in the book exactly what they are, but they're basically fallen angels. So you kind of have, that good versus evil and the myths there that kind of go along with those types of characters. But I picked them because they're just, not something that you see all the time. So that was kind of really where that came from. And I wanted Eric's character to be, that torn person who was, part of this world, but really belonged in this world and really wanted to bring in the found family theme, into the book as well. So that was really where my inspiration came from.
Yeah, so it sounds like lots of different things, not only informing
Mhm.
characters, but kind of drawing on these existing kind of mythologies and like
Yeah.
so many stories in the fantasy or speculative realm do. So I'm interested to hear, you were kind of taking something on the less beaten path. So that's very
Thank
interesting to
you.
hear how that kind of tied in together. Stephen, what about you? Obviously, this book is following a previous installment, but what was the inspiration for this particular title?
But
Oh, sorry, Stephen. There we go. I just asked you to unmute Zoom. How's that?
Okay.
Try. There we
So,
go.
well, I wanted to do, I mean, I thought it was ripe for the taking, that this revolution had happened 30 years earlier. It makes sense to go to the dawn of it and see what the first people who get these chips, what it looks like. I previously wrote a draft of this novel from the father's perspective, and he was a very different father. He's kind of a scoundrel, but I thought she was the most interesting person in the story, since she actually had a chip, and so I decided to write it from her. I wrote it from her point of view, and that changed the whole story really, and it was fun. It was fun to do. So
Yeah, I'm always fascinated when I hear writers talking about a story that started in one perspective and ended up working better in a different perspective. And I always used to think, oh my gosh, that must be so much work. And then it happened to me on a story I was writing, and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I finally understand that kind of mindset where that, becomes necessary. So I'm glad to hear, there's a similar kind of things happening with established writers like yourself.
mhm.
And Fish, what about you? What was the inspiration for this book?
Um, I I live in a very small town, so if you described it as like a one-horse town, there wouldn't be room for the horse. It's like we have no post office, no stores, there's no schools, there's nothing. But in the town next to us, there's a really small theater. It probably has maybe 80, 90, 100 seats. It's small. But it does seem to manage to attract people that are notable. So, like recently, I many people may not have heard of him, but I went to see a person called Carl Palmer. He's the drummer for a group called Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Oh yeah.
And in the 1970s, Emerson, Lake and Palmer were selling out 80,000 seat stadiums. And then seeing him in like an 80-seat theater, it was quite surreal. But the thing is with Carl Palmer, he's like pushing 80, so he's getting on and he's not going to be around forever. A person a few weeks prior to that I saw was Albert Lee. Again, a guitarist, did a lot of work with Eric Clapton, played in stadiums, seeing him in this very intimate thing. Again, he looks old. um, but then it occurred to me, when musicians like John Lennon or Michael Jackson or Prince, that they pass on, a lot of people miss their music and everything. So I initially, Born Posthumous started out as a short story, and I wrote the story of this beloved musician that when he was going to die, they kind of rushed in to try to have AI quickly train on his thoughts and things before he passed. And that short story ended with the statement, what happens next? And so I put that story aside for a few months and I kept thinking about it. And what Born Posthumous is about what happens next. So I embellished and extended out and added richness to the human story. And I interwove it with the what happens next into Posthumous's story. So it grew out from a short story, which grew out of seeing a number of musicians in intimate settings that were huge in their heyday. They still love to perform, but they're not going to be around forever. And I think a lot of them potentially might like to be around forever. And certainly I think a lot of hardcore fans would prefer them to be around forever. And if there's a way for them to create new music, potentially through AI, because if you train it on the way a person thinks, all of their catalog of material, their influences and so on, there is no reason today why you can't generate new songs that somebody could have written. And with Born Posthumous, when I started writing, there were a lot of things that weren't reality yet, but coming up to publication date next week, a lot of the things that weren't real yet have become real as well. So it's interesting, but the inspiration was a short story.
Fish, Emerson Lake and Palmer did an album that is related thematically, at least in title, to some of the stuff we're writing about, called Brain Salad Surgery. Do you remember that album?
Mm-hmm.
Seems apropos.
Yes.
Yeah, it's always interesting. I've always wondered, especially for writers writing in sci-fi, to almost have maybe not predicted necessarily, but anticipated certain things with things in their fiction. So I'm sure that's a very interesting experience in this case for both of you, really. And I think Tracey, if anything of the fantasy strain in your book happened to happen in real life, I think that would be a whole different story. But definitely interesting things to think about as writers. Kind of a similar question, actually, on that note, again, for all three writers, is what part of the writing process surprised you the most? Stephen, do you want to start us off this time?
What's the question? Which part of the writing process? What was the verb?
Surprised you the most?
Well, I was surprised that I had to rewrite the book. I mean, I thought it would be a winner with the father writing the story, and it didn't get a good reception. It got turned down at a bunch of publishing houses, and so I guess that was the first time I'd really had to rewrite something like a whole book. The Boost, I wrote the Boost in short order, and it just kind of went really easily. But this book took drafts. I think it's better though.
Yeah. That, I think that's its own excitement to hear about. So, yeah, I mean, I can only imagine that's got to be a big surprise, like that realization of actually this really core part of the writing needs to change, right? Exactly. Fish, what about you? What part of the writing process ended up surprising you the most?
How much I deviated from my story arc. Uh, I really do find at a personal level writing to be very organic. So as you're writing, the characters inform where they want to go, what they want to say, how they want to interact, what feels right within the context of the story. And invariably, in doing an initial arc and where things are going to go, you haven't fully developed the characters yet, and you haven't seen the dialogue that goes on. And it just surprised me. Like, it was completely orthogonal where the story went, which I was delighted with it. I really get a real kick out of the discovery process of seeing where the story goes in real time.
Yeah, it's very delightful when stories kind of take on stories or characters take on a mind of their own, and I can see that probably that had some impact here. And Tracy, what about you? What part of the writing process ended up surprising you?
Um, I'm in a very different spot from my fellow authors here because this is a debut novel for me, right? So this is the first time through the whole process. So just lots of wonderful things actually with just learning how, the whole process is once, your book is going to be published. But I think for writing the actual story, I would say probably very similar to Fish, right? Just you have a picture in your head of where you want the story to go, but it doesn't, there's so much that you have to fill in, right, as you're going through and, trying to figure out all the little nuances and things like that. And I think when you see it come together and it may not be exactly what you started with, where you thought you were going to end, or in their journey, but, I think for me, it's pretty much the same thing, just kind of seeing all of that, come together and just have it like just all fall into place. And then you have this really great picture, and you can see it. And then when you see it on the page, right, that's just a really wonderful feeling. So for me, I think that was probably the biggest thing.
Totally, yeah. I mean, it can be a very overwhelming process if you
Mhm.
when you really think about it, start to finish,
Mhm.
years long and artistically fulfilling and also taxing. So I
Mhm.
totally understand where you're coming from on all that.
Yeah.
And I know we've just got a couple minutes left here, but one question I always love to ask writers is, what is next for you? What's your next writing project on deck, if there is one? Tracy, while we're with you, what is next for you?
Sure. So, this is actually the first book of a series. So, I'm writing book two right now. The story itself is put together, but I'm filling in now and finessing and things. So, yeah, so that's been really fun. Of taking a character that pops up at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book, and it's his journey that's happening at the same time as this story. And then book three, they all come together. So that's where I am right now, but we're working on book two. So it's definitely exciting. I'm excited to see that the story progressing and moving along and how all the characters are going to come together.
Yeah, it sounds like the trilogy is getting quite seriously underway as we go along, so that's very exciting to be on the lookout for that. And
Yeah.
Fish, what about you? What is next for you as a writer?
I just finished writing a book called Flawed that deals with some of the flaws that a couple of my protagonists have. It's speculative fiction, so it was a little bit different than some of the other things. And I'm really happy with how it came out. And so I'm looking forward to hopefully getting that published next year.
Definitely another great project, another speculative project to be on the lookout for too, which is always, in my opinion, very exciting. I'm biased, of course, but excited to hear about that. And then closing us out, Stephen, what's up next for you?
Well, I have a nonfiction book that I ghost wrote that's coming out in April, I think. But a fiction book I'm working on is a historical novel that takes place in Spain in the 1650s. And the characters end up in a famous work of art.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I like instantly want to ask you more questions. So I think that
Well,
was
go
a
ahead.
fit for that. Well, very exciting. Three great books to be on
Yeah.
the lookout for, three great stories. So to all three of you for now, I just want to say thank you so much for being here and featuring, allowing us to feature your books here. I think it's always so wonderful to hear books come to life in the voices of their own creators. So To Tracey, Stephen, and Fish, thank you so much for being generous with your time and your thoughts in the Q&A today. Everybody in the audience, thank you for joining us to help us celebrate these wonderful authors. I do want to remind you all that you can order Seizing Fate, Dark Sight, and Born Posthumous from the links in the chat. And please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse our new and forthcoming releases, sign up for our email newsletter, or of course, you can submit a book manuscript of your own. Submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and just let us know that you attended today's event. We look forward to hearing from you, but until then, that's it for tonight. So have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You.
Bye-bye.
Bye.